I guess people liked the last video, and I still like wine, so... Wine Club Part 2, here we go.
That about does it for my rewatch of Gravity Falls, paired with delicious summer beers. A fully original idea by me, Mike. No one...
Shit.
Brought to you by Raycon. Welcome to Still Indoors, the show that is still happening. Sure, views are down, subscriber growth is... Actually, we lost 100 subscribers yesterday, but the point is, despite all of that, we are still going. I am still at my parents' house, and I still have no idea when this will change. I'm your host, Patrick Willems, and as you can see, we have lost power. But I'm going to keep on filming until the camera battery dies. My plan was to just do another TCM Wine Club episode, because that went so well last week. But now that I can't turn the TV on to watch movies, I don't know. I guess we've got to figure out something else. Jake, how are you guys doing?
Yeah, I think we're fine. We still got power over here. How are you doing?
I don't know. It's so dark here.
I'm realizing how alone I am. Isolated out here in the woods. All I can do is sit here and ponder the horrors that lie in wait out there in the dark. The half-seen form in the shadows, standing, its eyes gleaming in the void. The unspeakable and ancient terror of the deep woods. Phantasms watching me through the trees.
Pat, stop! You're being creepy. Knock it off.
Hey, all this monster talk reminds me. Did you realize it was recently the 3-year anniversary of the announcement of the Dark Universe?
Oh yeah, the Dark Universe. Freddy vs. Jason was part of that, right?
No, it wasn't, but good try, Jake. You know, I have a feeling this is gonna be a spooky episode. You got any spooky music for us?
Oh yeah, we can whip up something a little spooky for you tonight. Let's go, Rach.
So anyway, the Dark Universe. If you've already forgotten about it, here's a quick refresher. A few years back, Universal Pictures decided it was time to reboot their stable of classic movie monsters. This time, by copying the cinematic universe model pioneered by Marvel Studios. The Dark Universe only released one movie, Alex Kurtzman's The Mummy, starring Tom Cruise, and then it didn't so much end as much as it did a Homer Simpson quietly retreating back into the hedge. It's not officially dead, but also the Dark Universe Twitter account hasn't posted in 3 years. One of the many things that I love about the Dark Universe is that it's just the latest version of what Hollywood has been doing for decades. A studio has a well-known property, so they periodically attempt to reboot it using whatever style or approach is popular at the time, like every King Arthur or Robin Hood movie. Since their debut in the 1930s, the Universal monsters have had many iterations. Obviously, the originals are the most iconic, but I think the most interesting period occurred in the mid-90s. This was the time they were all reimagined as prestige dramas, with big budgets, A-list casts, and legendary directors. Francis Ford Coppola made Dracula, Robert De Niro played Frankenstein's monster, and there was a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde movie starring Julia Roberts. Did you forget that existed? Did you? Of course you did, everyone did. This was the time the monsters became fancy. And the crazy part is that this time, Universal didn't even make any of the movies. So how did this all happen? To find out, we have to go back to the beginning. Okay, you know what? This might take a while, and I don't know if the camera battery's gonna last. I'm gonna head down to the basement to see if I can switch the power back on.
All right, Pat, you go light that fuse box. Hey, you want some music so that your journey to the basement is a little less scary?
Absolutely.
Let's go.
irony of Universal trying to connect their monsters in a new cinematic universe is that nearly 80 years before Marvel built the MCU, Universal already made the first cinematic universe with the monsters. Starting in the 1930s with Todd Browning's Dracula, Universal rolled out several monster franchises featuring soon-to-be iconic characters like Frankenstein, the Mummy, and the Wolfman. Starting in 1943 with Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, the characters started occasionally crossing over with each other. 1948's Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein featured Frankenstein's monster, Dracula, the Wolfman, and the Invisible Man, all in one movie. Obviously, continuity between these movies was much looser than in modern cinematic universes, but they were still the first to innovate the form. By the early 50s, audiences' tastes were changing and actors were getting older. So shortly after the debut of The Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Universal monsters were put on the shelf. Over the next 20 years, these characters grew into pop culture icons. Dracula and Frankenstein are in the public domain, but no matter how many other studios made movies about them, and Hammer Films made 7 of each, the original versions portrayed by Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff remained the most iconic. At Universal, these characters lay dormant for decades. The old movies would play on TV constantly, but they only made one attempt at reviving them. John Badham's 1979 Dracula, featuring Frank Langella with big feathery disco hair. After that, nothing. For decades, horror was rarely what you would call a respected genre. Sure, it made money, but it was critically viewed as lower-class populist entertainment. Even Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, now widely considered a masterpiece, opened to mixed reviews and received Razzie Award nominations for Worst Director and Worst Actress. If you thought the Razzies only recently started sucking, don't worry, they always sucked. There were a couple exceptions. Both The Exorcist and Jaws were nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. But after 1976, no horror film would get that kind of recognition again. Until 1991. That was when Jonathan Demme's The Silence of the Lambs came along and in a truly shocking move, swept the 4 major categories at the Academy Awards: Best Picture, Director, Actress, and Actor. This kind of thing didn't happen. The Oscars were for important movies about war and terminal illnesses and why racism is bad. This was a movie about a serial killer who sews together skin he removes from his victims' bodies. This was... What's that? I thought something was chasing me. Okay. Anyway, what was I saying? But this did happen. A horror movie was now a prestigious Oscar movie. And while this was going on, another, very different trend was sweeping Hollywood.
John Grisham legal thrillers.
I mean, yes, but that's not the answer I was looking for. See, what I'm actually talking about is that this was a golden age for period dramas, especially ones based on classic works of literature. This was the time when Merchant Ivory productions were at their height. Howard's End and The Remains of the Day got back-to-back Best Picture nominations. Kenneth Branagh arrived on the scene and kicked off a new wave of Shakespeare adaptations. There was a boom in Jane Austen movies, a popular new version of Little Women, and starting with Clueless, all the modern teen adaptations of classic literature. Scorsese made The Age of Innocence. Michael Mann made Last of the Mohicans. There was that movie version of The Scarlet Letter that no one likes. Period dramas have never really gone out of style, but they were never more in style than in the 90s. The thing about Hollywood is that they're always trying to learn big lessons from anything that happens. Avatar is a hit, now every movie is in 3D. The Halle Berry Catwoman bombed, that means no more women in superhero movies. The Matrix is a hit, now everything is dressed in black and in slow motion. What I'm saying is, Hollywood is dumb and silly, so when horror movies were winning Oscars and period dramas were at their peak, naturally, they put those two things together. The perfect example of this was 1994's Interview with the Vampire. It was based on a hugely popular book that was full period drama gothic horror. Warner Brothers hired Neil Jordan, hot off the success of The Crying Game, and cast Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt. It's the kind of big, lavish, respectable production that just didn't happen in the horror genre. And also, that movie rules. So while all this is happening, what was Universal Pictures up to? Honestly, they were doing pretty great. They had Jurassic Park and Schindler's List in '93, True Lies in '94, Waterworld in '95. Okay, that didn't turn out so great, but that year they did have Babe. In the '90s, Universal just wasn't interested in making horror movies. Between '92 and '97, the only horror movies Universal produced were the Village of the Damned remake, 2 Tales from the Crypt movies, and The Relic. In comparison, this year alone, they have 6 horror movies, and this is the year with no movies. So this is where Sony Pictures saw an opening and swooped in. Back in 1989, John Peters and Peter Guber, the cigar-chomping, swinging dick producers behind movies like Batman, became the co-chairman of Sony Pictures, and over the next 5 years, nearly ran it into the ground. That said, between 1990 and 1994, the studio accumulated more Oscar nominations than any studio ever had in a 4-year period. So you kind of see where their priorities were. They're here looking at what movies are doing well, like, hey, what if we made big blockbuster horror movies that also won Oscars? So first things first, they get Francis Ford Coppola to make a Dracula movie. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked here. I came down to find the fuse box. I don't know where that is. Okay. Let me see. These... they're all switched on. The whole road must have lost power. I guess, I don't know. Something took down a power line? Shit. Do you hear that? I think it came from outside. I'm gonna go investigate.
Did he just go outside?
I think he just went outside. It's like he's never seen a horror movie before. What the hell?
Music?
Yeah. All right.
Is anyone out here? Please stop making scary sounds. Okay, I don't see anything. I mean, I can't see anything because it's pitch black. So anyway, let's just talk about Dracula. In 1992, Sony Pictures released Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola and featuring an A-list cast including Gary Oldman, Anthony Hopkins, Winona Ryder, Keanu Reeves, and Tom Waits. It put Bram Stoker's name right in the title, announced into the world that this is not the old Bela Lugosi Universal monster Dracula. This is a faithful adaptation of a literary classic. This was Dracula as a grand Gothic romance. Dracula as a celebration of old-fashioned filmmaking techniques from the silent era. Dracula as Oscar bait. I shouldn't really say Oscar bait because that makes it sound stuffy and boring. This movie is a totally gonzo blast. 5 minutes in, Dracula stabs a cross with a sword and it sprays blood out as he renounces God. This movie is wild. Like, Coppola fired the big FX company he had and got his 28-year-old son to handle all the visual effects. Who does that? Dracula is a special case of a big studio movie where the director is set free and just fucking goes for it. It doesn't look like any other movie released that decade. It might be a bit of a triumph of style over substance, but I don't really care when the style is this good. Powered by a great marketing campaign with genuinely one of the best trailers ever, Dracula was a huge hit. It made back more than 5 times its budget and won 3 Oscars for makeup, sound editing, and costume design. All well-deserved. So then after the success of Dracula, Coppola started developing a Frankenstein movie using the exact same approach. emphasizing fidelity to the original novel and casting A-list actors in a big, lavish, gothic production. This was not Universal Monsters' Frankenstein, this was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Coppola opted not to direct it himself, but remained a producer and brought in Robert De Niro to play the monster. As director and lead actor, he hired Kenneth Branagh, the guy who had revitalized the modern Shakespeare movie. So here's my general rule with Kenneth Branagh as a director. When it's Shakespeare, his approach works great. When it's pretty much anything else, he's doing way too much and it becomes totally overbearing. The screenwriter for the movie, Frank Darabont, who was also making The Shawshank Redemption at the same time, said of the final film, quote, "Oi, my Waterloo, my worst experience. Actually, the script was great, the movie was a mess. You can't really judge the script based on what you saw on the screen. It got rephrased and messed with every inch of the way." I sympathize with Darabont here because I think there is a great script there. For me, the problem is all Branagh's execution. Every single scene is cranked to 11. The actors are constantly shouting as if they're on stage trying to reach the balcony while the camera just keeps spinning around them. Seriously, no matter what's happening, a dialogue scene, a sex scene, a murder scene, the camera is spinning. There are no dynamics, no quiet parts to make the loud part stand out. Every part is the loud part. Frankenstein! The movie was not the hit that Dracula was. It made its money back internationally but flopped domestically and was regarded as a critical and commercial disappointment. In an interview around Frankenstein's release, Branagh mentioned that Coppola had initially considered making a whole trilogy of monster movies, with the third being a werewolf movie. That didn't come to pass, but it didn't stop Sony from making a werewolf movie of their own. Did you hear that? It sounded like something at the edge of the woods. I need to go investigate, so I'm going to hand things over to special correspondent Charl for what's sure to be another great installment of Let's Get Coconuts. Huh? Why are you asking me that? Yes, of course I think this bit still works. Don't you? Well, what else should we do? You really want to do this right now? In front of everyone? How dare you? Look, I don't have time for this right now. I'm out here in the dark, trying to figure out what the hell is going on. We are ending this segment right now. I'm sorry about that. Let's just move on. So, here's the thing about the Wolfman. Unlike Dracula and Frankenstein, it's not actually based on any classic work of literature. It's just a movie about a werewolf. Universal only owns the name The Wolfman, so Sony made a werewolf movie. This one wasn't a period drama, but it was aimed squarely at adults. It's about Jack Nicholson as the editor-in-chief of a publishing house having a midlife crisis. But that midlife crisis is expressed by turning into a werewolf. They got Mike Nichols, Oscar-winning director of The Graduate, to make this, working from a script Jim Harrison wrote in the 80s with an uncredited rewrite by Elaine May. And here's my favorite part. It was one of the most expensive movies of 1994. It went way over budget and required extensive reshoots for the ending. So in the end, Wolf cost more than Forrest Gump, Interview with the Vampire, Clear and Present Danger, Stargate, and it cost more than twice as much as Speed. And most of the movie is just people in offices talking. Wolf is such a strange movie. Like, I guess Sony just wanted to make a werewolf movie and this happens to be the script they already had. I think the movie is kind of awesome, but I'm not surprised it wasn't a bigger hit. It did okay since, Jack Nicholson as a werewolf is a thing people want to see, but it didn't make much of an impact and it's been sadly forgotten. And then there's Mary Riley, the one no one saw and everyone forgets about. In 1989, Peters and Goober bought the rights to Valerie Martin's novel Mary Riley, which retold the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from the perspective of a housekeeper. The project was passed from Roman Polanski to Tim Burton, and then in the end it finally got made when they just hired the entire team from Dangerous Liaisons. Seriously, they got everyone. Director Stephen Frears, writer Christopher Hampton, cinematographer Philippe Rousselot, composer George Fenton, and stars John Malkovich and Glenn Close. And in the title role, they got one of the biggest movie stars in the world, Julia Roberts, who spends the entire film looking deeply uncomfortable as she struggles her way through an Irish accent that just never really works. Like, people talk shit about Keanu and Dracula, but Julia isn't doing much better here.
When I was little and he was in work, he wasn't so bad then. It was the drinking that did it.
John Malkovich, playing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, pulls a Kevin Costner and just doesn't even attempt an accent, which is probably the smarter move. So Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde isn't really one of the canonical Universal monsters. Like, Universal never actually made a solo movie about him. But I guess he gets lumped in because they produced Abbott and Costello Meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in 1948, and then he shows up in Van Helsing and the 2017 Mummy, so I guess he's just part of the family now? Of the 4 Sony monster movies, this is the worst-case scenario for the prestige drama approach to horror. It shoves all the interesting Jekyll and Hyde stuff off-screen, and instead focuses on an extremely boring, passive central character. Like, instead of showing Mr. Hyde murdering people, we have scenes where Julia Roberts gets yelled at for breaking a cup.
But I understand a cup was broken.
Unsurprisingly, the movie was a huge bomb, and pretty much brought the prestige horror movie period to an end. Plus, Peters and Goober, who had greenlit all these movies, had already left Sony by the time it was released. Oh God, what am I doing out here? This is so stupid. I need to get back inside. I need to hide. So here's another installment of Matt Wines while I run back inside.
Now, I'm gonna be level with you. I didn't watch Rugrats Go to Paris, but I did check in on the show after the Fat film came out. So then we had Vicky, and Chucky's dad remarried. And here's another problem. People's problems started getting solved. Chucky's dad should stay single. He needs to stay single. So not only are they getting cute, there's this expectation now that problems will be solved and people will get to feel good. It's not weird, it's not kind of trippy, but it was a show that was begging for a death long before it was allowed to die. Cutified, highly marketable, pale echoes of what used to be these bizarre and very unique things. And this stuff happens all the time because you can wring value out of it until you have a gray, flavorless, lifeless IP that you can then just sort of lock away in a cell, and maybe you can revivify it if you're extra greedy, or if you have some sort of visionary who's willing to lend his own creative life force and fire to it, a la Alan Moore with Swamp Thing or whatever.
There isn't much battery left in the camera, and I'm running out of time. Maybe I should put some kind of message here in case this is the end for me, in case that thing that's outside gets in here, like some kind of final message to be remembered by. What if the final thing that I ever hear is Matt's dumb Rugrats rant, and I didn't even get to hear the end of it? Okay, if this is the end, then let me at least finish delivering this speech. So, what is the legacy of Sony's mid-90s monster revival? Looking back, it seems insane that most of these movies are largely forgotten. There is a big-budget movie where Jack Nicholson is a werewolf. Robert De Niro played Frankenstein's monster just a year before he made Heat and Casino. Dracula is the only one that seems to have had any lasting impact on popular culture. Mostly, it's the image of old man Dracula in the red cloak with the big heart-shaped hair that stuck around and been parodied countless times. I think the problem is that the rest of the movies weren't good or bad enough to be remembered. Frankenstein isn't a disaster, it's just kind of disappointing. Wolf is too strange to connect with a wide audience, and the horror elements are a relatively minor part of the film. One thing that is interesting about it is the way the early scenes of Nicholson discovering his new wolf abilities and heightened senses feel like a preview of similar scenes that would appear in countless superhero movies in the following decade. And Mary Riley is just boring. I watched it 3 days ago and can barely remember it. In the end, Sony's spin on the Universal monsters yielded one hit, one flop, one bomb, and a movie that did okay but went so far over budget that the studio probably regretted it. As always happens, new trends developed for horror movies. Scream kicked off a huge wave of teen horror. While Sony had spent the 90s chasing Oscars with horror movies, the next horror movie to actually get a Best Picture nomination was The Sixth Sense in 1999. But what I think is significant about these movies is that they represent the last of a dying breed. They were big-budget, auteur-driven genre movies for adults. They were all rated R. By the end of the decade, movies like these had almost completely stopped getting made. When Universal finally got their shit together and rebooted the monsters themselves, in the Mummy movies and 2004's Van Helsing, they did it in the form that has dominated the box office for the past 20 years. Huge CGI-filled blockbuster action movies, all rated PG-13. And The Dark Universe was pretty much the same thing. Oh man, I haven't thought about Van Helsing in years. Do you remember that at the end of that movie, Hugh Jackman finds out from Dracula that he's really the Archangel Gabriel, who—
Pat, we do not have time for a 10-minute tangent on Van Helsing. The camera is about to die.
Okay, fine, maybe in another video, if I can just get to the end of this one. So Universal made one other attempt at rebooting the monsters in between Van Helsing and The Dark Universe. It was the 2010 remake of The Wolfman, which seemed to hew closer to Sony's approach from the 90s. It was rated R, it had a big budget, an A-list cast of movie stars, and was set in the late 1800s. And it was also a huge critical and commercial disappointment. The Sony monster movies are just one tiny chapter in the endless, bizarre history of Hollywood studio filmmaking. I get that there's something inherently kind of pretentious about the approach to these movies. They're all made by directors with no experience in horror, who never returned to the genre again, who almost seem to be looking down at the genre as they attempt to make real movies. It's like a precursor to that annoying term elevated horror that some critics throw at any horror movie released by A24. But at the same time, I appreciate how seriously they all took it, because as much as there are approximately 18,000 Dracula movies, Dracula was originally just one book, written by Bram Stoker. It wasn't a franchise, and these movies were going back to the source of these stories. There was no intention of making sequels or building a new brand for Sony. However misguided some of it may have been, these were big, ambitious attempts to make capital G great movies. As of this year, it seems that Universal has finally learned the lesson they should have learned years ago. That the monsters are not superheroes. They're not action stars. People won't go see them solely for nostalgia. These are meant to be horror movies, and the versions that have worked are the ones that remembered that. The Invisible Man is one of my favorite movies of the year so far, and it was a huge box office success. And I think that's because it knows what it's supposed to be. It's a horror movie. The character is supposed to be unsettling. And it seems that's what Universal is doing now. And by Universal, I really mean Blumhouse Productions, who is developing these properties for Universal. They have a new Dracula in the works directed by Karen Kusama. It seems like the Dark Universe as we knew it is over. But you never know. I spend a lot of time thinking about whether there's a way to bring it back and potentially make it work.
You know, I hope one day we get another adventure with beloved character Nick Morton. Hit it.
Me too, buddy. Me too. Ah, there it is. And just when I was starting to lose all hope. Looking at that sweet, sweet electric glow makes me realize what really matters most to me. Power. I've been spiraling these past few weeks, trying desperately to find some purpose, usually at the bottom of a wine bottle. But I lost sight of what is best in life. And that is to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentations of their women.
So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make this talk show the best talk show in the goddamn world. I will destroy all who stand in my way, and one day, I'll make Krasinski pay for what he's done. No more distractions, no wine, no outside world. Parents, I'm extending my stay.
Okay, Pat. But look, you've got to start helping me split the firewood.
Patrick, your phone keeps ringing. It says it's someone named Dave the Agent?
Hey, Patrick, it's me. Where are you? What is going on? John keeps calling me. We're trying to get this deal done, but it is very time sensitive. You gotta call me back.
Okay, now that the power is back on, it's time to start work on the next video. I've got, let me count, 9 movies to watch, so I'm going to curl up on the couch with my laptop and pop in my Raycon Everyday E25 earbuds. And then after I finish watching the movies, I'll leave these in while I'm researching and writing because I tend to listen to a lot of music during that part of the process. Mostly Daniel Pemberton's score for the movie Steve Jobs. I just play that on a loop while I'm writing. I love these things. Sometimes I wear them for hours at a time, so it's a great thing that they have 6 hours of playtime and are super comfortable. They sound amazing and start at half the price of any other premium wireless earbuds. And you can get 15% off your first pair. All you have to do is click the link in the description. They're available in a bunch of cool different colors. They come in this nice little case that charges them. So whether you need something comfortable that sounds good while working on your own videos, or if you just want some great Bluetooth earbuds, give these a try.
So do yourself a favor and watch this series by Alex Hirsch. You'll have a gravity ball. I know it's not great. What do you want from me? I thought this bit would be over like 4 weeks ago. What the fuck are we doing here, man? Pitched it during Pat for like the first week of the thing. I thought we were doing 1 week of a talk show. I'm not even wearing pants right now. Are you kidding me? Balls hot in my apartment right now. Ugh.
Did he just go outside?
Let's do it. Maybe do it a little less. I like what you're doing, but maybe...
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Did he just go outside?
You know, I hope one day we get another adventure from beloved character Nick Morton. Let's hit it.
I forgot to play.
Let's go. Fuck the rip up. I went back up to the top and then didn't get it. I don't know why. And that song sounded cute, but it was by Vampire Weekend. Ugh. Yeah, we're doing fine over here. We still got power. It sounds like weird. Yeah. Oh, John. Pat, we do not have time for a 10-minute tangent about Van Helsing, the 2004 film with huge Jack Man. No, yeah, we're just like, let's just do that.
Okay.
How do we time it so we do it at the same time? Just react when I react, okay?
Okay.
Pat, you've picked like the holy trinity of Ookies.
The Ookies.
Oh my god, Pat, you've picked like the holy trinity of spooky places to go to. Everybody knows basement's got goblins, woods got some witches, and attic's got heckin' mummos.